There comes a point in some relationships where you have to ask yourself a very uncomfortable question. Is this person still supposed to be in my life? And that's not an easy question to answer, because sometimes people leave your life because they hurt you. Sometimes they lied to you. Sometimes they manipulate you. Sometimes they drag you into situations that you know you shouldn't be involved in. But sometimes nobody did anything wrong. Sometimes life just takes two people in completely different directions. And sometimes, and this is the hardest one to admit, you might actually be the reason the relationship fell apart. I've had friendships end for all three of those reasons. I've watched people I was incredibly close to become complete strangers. I've stayed in situations way longer than I should have. And I've always looked back at certain friendships and realized that maybe my expectations weren't always fair. So, when do you forgive somebody? When do you fight for a friendship? When do you accept that you've simply grown apart? And when do you finally say, I love you, I wish you the best, but I can't keep doing this to myself? Today, we're talking about friendship, forgiveness, toxic relationships, unrealistic expectations, and the uncomfortable truth that sometimes you have to cut people off. What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the Cody Springer Show, episode 149. Sometimes you have to cut people off. And I've noticed that some of my better podcast episodes is when I'm talking about personal stuff. And I am going to get into some personal stories on today's show. And I was thinking in my head, like, what would be the best song to kind of describe this episode? And it just popped in my head, Good Riddance by Green Day. And yeah, it is so fitting because in the song, he says it's something unpredictable, but in the end, it's right. I hope you have the time of your life. And basically that's saying, like in the end, everything is going to be okay. Because, some of the people that I'm going to talk about in this podcast, I thought they would be lifelong friends. I really did think it would be that way. And, I'm only going to talk about a select few people on the show. I'm not going to talk about every single person that was a friend or anything like that, because hell, I'd be up here all freaking night talking about this, and I just simply do not have the time to get into all of it. But yes, we're going to talk about sometimes you have to cut people out of your life. And some of my friendships have ended badly. Some simply just faded away. Some was because of an unhealthy situation, and some ended because I had expectations that weren't necessarily fair. But, the main question is here, how do you know when it's time to let somebody go? All right, guys, I'm going to tell you guys about this guy named Jake. And, this is not an actual picture of me and him. I just had this made up for context and for storytelling purposes. So this is not actually me, and that's not actually Jake. Kind of looks like us a little bit, but it's actually not us. But yeah, so yeah, I met Jake in middle school, and when I met him in middle school, Jake was like kind of like a skinny kid, He was like really thin and everything, but then he really bulked up as we got into high school. He really like bulked up and stuff like that. And then, people talk shit and said, "Oh, he was using steroids." No, he just was lifting weights, getting stronger. But yeah, man, like Jake, he was quiet, but he didn't take shit off of nobody. He really didn't. He would fight. He wouldn't take shit from nobody. Now with me, I'll admit I kind of had some thin skin at times. I wore my emotions on my sleeve. And as I've gotten older, I've become more hardened, I would say. I kind of care less now than I did before about what other people think. But Jake, man, he was like the complete opposite. Like he took nobody's shit. He didn't give a fuck what anybody thought. He did what he had to do. But I will say that he had my back when nobody else did. And I really appreciated him having my back and being a friend and being there and everything. And yeah, he was my best friend in high school. And, we were friends after graduation because after you graduate high school, sometimes people just fall out of touch. Like people, kind of just move on and everything. And then they stop hanging out. They stop, hanging out and doing things together and all that. They just kind of go their own separate path. But Jake and I, we stayed friends after graduation. And then I would say probably about 6 months to a year after graduation, he decided he was going to enlist into the Marines. So yeah, he joined up, he enlisted, and yeah, he started his new life pretty much. He was stationed in Okinawa, Japan at one point, and then he was also stationed in South Carolina at one point in time. But Jake would keep in touch with me through Facebook. He did do that. He would check in with me every now and then, see how I'm doing, and then I would, ask him how he's doing. So we still stayed in touch, even though it was just, through Facebook. And then the last time I saw him was 2016, 2017. I think it was 2017. Yeah, he was on break from he was taking a leave, so he came back to Van Wert to visit his family and everything, and then he came over to my apartment, and we talked for a little bit, and we hung out for a little bit, and then that was the last time I actually saw him. And then he deactivated his Facebook account because, Jake, he wasn't really like about that social media stuff. He really wasn't. Yeah, so he would go through periods of time where he would reactivate his Facebook account, and then he would deactivate it. He did not want to be involved with social media at all, really. So yeah, he deactivated his account, and I just lost contact with him. So it's been close to 10 years now since the last time we've actually seen each other. And yeah, it's pretty wild. It's been almost 10 years since I've last seen him. But the thing here is, Jake, he didn't betray me. We didn't have a massive falling out. I'm not angry or pissed at him. I'm not. I actually would like to reconnect with him at some point in time, if that's possible. Because I do believe that he's actually living back in Van Wert. I would just have to find a way to get a hold of him and see, how's he, how he is these days. But yeah, I would like to reconnect with Jake, but the thing about it is, life took us in two totally different directions. He made a career out of being in the Marines, and me, I became a podcaster and a family man and a husband. Yeah. But the key point here is that not every friendship that ends is a failed friendship. Sometimes two people simply grow in different directions. And, life had different plans for Jake, and I didn't align with those plans. It just, how it all panned out, I guess. But like I said, I'm not angry, I'm not bitter towards him at all. Um, I just hope he's doing well, and I would love to reconnect someday if that's possible. All right, so I got to talk about a major personal story here, and this was about a girl named Allyson that I used to be friends with. Yeah, this picture, obviously it's not of the two of us. But I had it, you know, made up to, for story purposes and everything. But yeah, so her and I actually met at McDonald's. Yeah, we were coworkers. She started like I want to say like in 2015 or something like that. Yeah, it was like late 2014, early 2015 when she started working there. And I trained her on some stuff, like front counter, drive through, stuff like that, because I was a crew trainer at the time. And I started to get to know Allison more, and I developed feelings for her. I liked her. And yeah, I mean, she was kind of in a complicated place in her own personal life, but a friend of mine told me, like, like, you just need to tell her how you feel, see what happens. So I confessed my feelings towards her, and she seemed like really excited. She was like kind of excited, but kind of nervous, like, oh, you like me? I'm like, yeah, I do. Um, so yeah, we hung out, as friends, but I was kind of getting put in the friend zone. You know what I mean? Like, she didn't allow me to be too close or anything like that. So she kind of kept putting me in the friend zone and everything. And don't get me wrong, we got along great as friends. But yeah, it just kind of kept going that way. And then one night she asked me if I wanted to go out with her and a friend of hers to the Old South, which was a bar in Van Wert. I think it's closed down now. I think it's been closed for a while. But that bar yeah, that bar always had some kind of incidents going on with it. But yeah, so she asked me if I wanted to go out with her and her friend to the Old South, and I agreed. And so we went, had a couple drinks, hung out and everything. And then we had to leave. I had to go back home because I had work in the morning, and then she needed to go back home as well, and we ended up kissing that night. So I thought that we were going towards that direction of possibly dating and being together. but that did not happen. Yeah, she put me back in the friend zone. I didn't hear from her for a while, and then I would see her at work, and yeah, just things got a little weird. And then she got kicked out of where she was living at, and she needed somewhere to stay. And me trying to be a nice friend and trying to help her out, I offered her to stay with me. So she agreed to stay at my place with me. I told her, you can stay as long as you need until you know, figure out what you're going to do. And she said, okay. Now, Allison and I were kind of still in that space of, we, I wanted to be with her. I wanted to be her boyfriend. I wanted to be in a relationship with her, but I just I was getting starting to get the feeling that maybe she didn't feel the same way about me that I felt about her. And then she would do this thing where she would like leave in the middle of the day and said, "Oh, I'm going to go to my brother's house." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And then sometimes I offer to drive her there, and she's like, "No, no, no, I'll just walk. It's not that far away." I'm like, okay, Well, after a while, I was getting the feeling that something was up. Just like something didn't feel right. I kind of had this suspicion that she was seeing a guy. And one day I was on Instagram and I saw her and this guy that I used to go to school with named Stefan kiss. So I was like, son of a bitch, I was right. She was going and seeing a guy. And here's the thing, Allyson, she was well in her right to, go see whoever she wanted to see. She was single, she wasn't tied down to anybody, you know, and yeah, she didn't owe me anything really. But at the same time, she knew I had feelings for her, and we already kissed once before. And, I just felt like, she was kind of manipulating me a little bit and she was lying about the whole thing. Like she did not want me to find out that she was secretly seeing Stefan. And I confronted her about it. I finally had enough. I was like, Allyson, you need to tell me the truth. What's going on with you and Stefan? And she kept trying to say, oh, we're just friends. That kiss meant nothing on Instagram. It was just a joke. We wanted to see what people would do. It's not that big of a deal. And she got like really defensive. And I come to find out that, that explanation was bullshit. They were together. So I told her, like, like, stop bullshitting me. I know you two are together. You led me on. You lied to me. And she got really defensive, and we got into a huge argument about it. And she left. She left my place. And I was just like, okay, well, fuck you then. I don't want you here if you're gonna lie and manipulate me. You know what I mean? So yeah, I was pissed off with her, and I wanted nothing to do with her. So a couple weeks went by, and I mean, it was awkward working with her. It really was, because we were both pissed off at each other, and I just kept my head down, did my job, and just we only spoke about work. And then she came up to me one night and said, "Hey, can we talk?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we can." And she apologized to me. She said, "Hey, I'm really sorry I led you on. I did not mean to do that." Um, I was just afraid if I told you about Stefan, then, we weren't going to be friends anymore. And I'm like, well, no, that's not the case. I mean, yeah, I would have been disappointed, but I would have gotten over it and stayed friends. But here's the thing, I just I would have appreciated if she was just honest with me. If she was just upfront and honest with me, saying, hey, I'm seeing somebody else. I know you have feelings for me and stuff, but you know, I I would just prefer if we were just friends. If she would have said that right from the jump, I would have been a little disappointed about it, but I would have been understanding and I would have accepted it. So we talked it out. I forgave her, and we were just friends. And then um I would say about 5 to 6 months later, things got super complicated with me and Allyson because her and Stefan were having issues. Like, it was getting to the point where she did not want to be with him anymore. She was getting tired of his shit, and she was just unhappy. And she was spending more time with me at my apartment. And at this point, I had moved over to a different apartment complex. And yeah, she was just spending a lot of time with me, and things progressed into sex. Yeah, Allyson and I started having sex, and she was cheating on Stefan with me. Yeah, I didn't really necessarily care all that much about how Stefan felt about it because, this whole thing between him, Allyson, and me, yeah, Stefan and I basically hated each other after this. And Stefan I've known for a long time, because I went to school with him and his brother. Yeah, we've known each other since the 6th grade. And yeah, man, this whole thing between him, Allyson, and me made Stefan and I hate each other pretty much. So yeah, this was going on. And then Allyson came to me and said, hey, I have a check I need a cash and I don't have a bank account anywhere, and I need someone to cash this check for me. And it was coming from Stefan's mom's bank account. That's what she told me, that, basically her mom was letting them cash checks for whatever they needed. I didn't question it. I trusted her blindly, and I cashed the check for her. So I took her to the bank and I cashed the check and it bounced. Come to find out, the checks were from his mom's old bank account that she wasn't even using. Like, the checking account was inactive, but Stefan got a hold of her old checkbook, and her and Allyson were writing bad checks. So it fucked my bank account all the way up. I was so pissed. Like beyond belief, dude. I was so pissed off that, she did that to me. But here's the thing. She did pay me back what, I basically got fucked with and everything, because what happened was, the check bounced, and then I was supposed to get paid on a Friday, and basically the bank took my whole check. because that check bounced. And then she ended up paying me back the money that I lost, from that paycheck. But everybody else that, cashed these checks for them, yeah, they did not pay them back. They got screwed over. So then they went to the cops, and then Allyson and Stefan both got charged for check fraud. And then at that point, Allyson was just spiraling because, she went back into using heroin, and I didn't even know that she was using. Because when I met her, she was clean, she was sober. But when she got around Stefan, he got her hooked back on the heroin. And Allyson, she was not showing up for work. And my boss, our boss, was getting tired of her not showing up. Like, she was just blowing off work. She was late all the time. And yeah, our boss eventually had enough and she was fired. Yeah, they let her go. And then, like I said, she was using again, and to be clear, she never used around me. She told me that she was using again. And I told her, like, well, you gotta get help. You gotta get clean and everything. And she's like, I know, I'm screwing up, but I allowed myself to get hooked back on the shit because of Stefan. But yeah, with her, catching that case and the heroin addiction and her not basically refusing to leave Stefan, even though she was unhappy with him. Yeah, I reached a point where I had to remove myself from the whole situation. So, yeah, I basically cut Allyson out of my life. And it was a hard thing to do because I cared about her. But things were just not good, And I was getting myself caught up in this situation. And I just basically came to the realization that some people aren't worth losing yourself over. I could not save her. She was going to have to do it herself. And I'm not the type of person to give up on people. I'm not. But at some point in time, you have to reach a point where you have to realize enough's enough. And that's where I was at with her. Like, there was just too much shit happening, and I could not keep going. So I reached a point where I said, enough's enough. I can't save her. And if I continue to go down this road, then I'm going to drown right along with her. And I just was not willing to do that. But, but that's the thing. I wasn't innocent in the situation. I did wrong, with, basically, when she was cheating on him with me and everything. So yeah, I'm no saint in the situation. I'm not a victim, so to speak. But at the same time, I pulled myself away from the situation before it got totally worse for me. But as far as I know, today, Allyson is doing good, from what I've heard. So that's good to hear. She's away from Stefan. Yeah, I wasn't an innocent bystander. I made choices because I was emotionally invested. All right, let's talk about forgiveness and what it actually means. Because, here's the thing, you can forgive somebody that did you wrong without taking them back as a friend. because you can love someone and still know that they're bad for you. So yeah, you can forgive them, but you don't have to take them back as a friend. Like, you can look at them and say, "Hey, you did me wrong and it hurt me, but I'm going to forgive you, but that does not mean that we're friends because you still have things in your life that you need to improve upon, and you're, in my opinion, you're still bad for me." And then you can accept an apology without giving somebody unlimited access to you. You can set boundaries, you can set limits on that person. That doesn't mean that a person apologizes to you and you forgive them and then things go back to normal. No. You can set some new boundaries, some new rules, and it's completely fine. But do not let them come back in and thinking everything's okay, and then they just end up pissing in your mouth later. Don't let them do it. Because forgiveness isn't permission to repeat the same behavior over and over and over again. It's not. Yeah, that'd be like if I came to your house and I start vandalizing stuff. I take your trash can, dump out all your trash. Set your furniture on fire, clog your toilets. I just cause a bunch of mayhem, right? And then let's just say, 6 months down the road, you forgive me, but at the same time, it's not permission for me to go back to your house and fuck shit up. It's not permission to do the same thing over and over and over again. And to get closure on a situation, it doesn't always require the other person. Like, you don't need to talk to that person that did you wrong in order for there to be closure. I mean, some situations do need closure, but you don't necessarily need that other person to talk to and say, "Hey, I forgive you for what you did." No, you can forgive them and move on. You can close the door on a particular friendship that went bad and not talk to the other person. Because you're basically allowing yourself to forgive them and forgive what they did, so that way it doesn't sit on your heart. It doesn't sit in your consciousness. That way you're not carrying it around. You're allowing yourself to move forward, but you don't need to necessarily hit up the other person and say, "Hey, I forgive you." All right, this next story is about a guy who did appear on the show back when it first got started, and that was Marcel Salcido. And the picture that I have here is from 2019. It's me, Crystal, and Marcel. Yeah, this was back in September of 2019. I think we were filming C&M Entertainment around that time. Yeah, and that's probably going to be another reflection episode that I'm probably going to do in the future. But yeah, I'm not going to really get into extravagant details about the whole Marcel story because I've talked about it, a lot and everything. But I will say that he and I were really close. We were like brothers. And I believe that I developed certain expectations out of him. And looking back, I've realized that some of those expectations I had of him weren't fair. It really wasn't. And I may have been viewing the friendship too much from my perspective. I realize now that I didn't really think about his perspective on things. And I allowed the expectations I had of Marcel to cloud my judgment. And I was being selfish. Yes, I will admit that. I was being selfish and everything. And yeah, I mean, because here's the thing. The reason why I think things broke down between he and I, yeah, I think it was a lack of communication, but I also think, part of it was because I had expectations of him that I was allowing myself to get too pissed off and frustrated about everything he did. When I should have taken a step back and try to look at things from his perspective. Because I think if I would have done that, then maybe things wouldn't have went down the way they did. But, I'm acknowledging my part in it. I mean, the thing about it is just because I did something for him doesn't mean that he's necessarily obligated to do the same thing for me. I mean, yeah, friends should have each other's backs and everything. But just because I did something for someone doesn't automatically mean they have to do the same exact thing for me. So yeah, I will admit when it came to that particular friendship, yeah, I was at fault for the things that were happening. The lack of communication. And I think another thing too, like the expectations that I had for him was probably driving him away. So yeah, I mean, now that I think about it, yeah, I was probably driving him away. But, it is what it is. All right, time for some final thoughts here. What did these stories about these particular individuals what did it teach me? Jake taught me that sometimes people simply move on. Allyson, she taught me that sometimes you have to remove yourself before somebody else's choices consume you. And that Marcel taught me that sometimes you need to look at your own expectations and behavior. Because not every person you lose was supposed to stick around in your life. And not every person you forgive deserves access to you again. And sometimes, before you blame somebody else for a friendship ending, you have to be willing to look at yourself. Yes, you gotta be able to look at yourself and think, like, what did I do? What did I say? But all right, guys, that's all I got for today's episode. Thank you guys for your support of the Springer Podcast Network. And if you haven't already, go check out the newest episode of The Crystal Show. My wife Crystal did an episode about Plushie's Playground and eating disorders and how you can't really afford to give in to peer pressure. It's a really insightful episode. My wife talks about her own experiences. So yeah, guys definitely got to go check it out. It's a really good episode, and stay tuned for new episodes every week here on the Springer Podcast Network. All right, guys, take care, and I'll talk to you all very soon.